Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Gabby Birenbaum, DC correspondent at the Nevada Independent. Gabby, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Early voting has started in Nevada, one of the biggest swing states, one of the seven battleground states in this country. So can you talk about what you're seeing there?
Yeah, what we're seeing right now is pretty unprecedented in terms of the recent, post 2008 era of Democratic machine dominance in Nevada. Nevada has always been a swing state, but the Democratic Party has been really effective at both voter registration, get out the vote efforts, sort of everything that runs the gamut there. And so typically what you'll see is throughout mail and early voting, Democrats build up what they call a firewall in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is and where 70% of the vote is. So typically before Election Day, you'll see Democrats run up the numbers, and then Republicans with their in-person vote on Election Day bring it back up to somewhere close to even. Right now, we're seeing the opposite. So right now, Democrats' advantage in Clark County is only about 4.5 points in terms of people who have already voted. And it's been tabulated either early or by mail. By a point of comparison, right, Joe Biden won Clark County by 9 points. So that's the metric that Harris is going to be looking for. At the same time, the rural counties are outperforming their vote share by about 4% right now in turnout through early voting, through mail. Those are heavily Republican. And so all that is contributing to right now, Republicans actually have a firewall that Democrats are going to have to try to knock down with the second week of early voting, with more mail and with Election Day. And right now, Republicans are up about 4.2% in the state.
The editor of the Nevada Independent said that Republicans ahead in early voting, quote, could signal serious danger for the Dems and for Kamala Harris here. When you're talking to Democrats in Nevada, do they feel the same way too?
I mean, I think they've always thought that this is going to be a really close election, and there are some dynamics that do make this cycle different than others. The big one between 2020 and 2024 in Nevada has been the explosion of registered nonpartisans. So the majority of the electorate in Nevada right now, not the majority, but the biggest group are registered nonpartisans. So it's increasingly hard for each party to turn out their partisans and then also identify who are the leaners among independents and find them. So it's going to be hard as well to predict, right, because we have all these independent ballots come in and we don't know until Election Day who they voted for. The other thing to note is that, like I mentioned, Biden won Clark County by about 9 points. That registration edge has dwindled in the last 4 years. So right now, Democrats' voter registration edge in Clark County is only 7 points. So if Harris were to, get that 7-point advantage in Clark, if that pattern holds, and right now, as we see, Democratic turnout in Clark is not where they want it to be. If it does hold and they have a 7-point advantage in Clark, she'll still need to win independents in order to win, because 7 points in Clark is likely not enough to take the state.
You're talking about those nonpartisan voters. Obviously, that's a critical group in a swing state. So what are the issues that matter most to them?
I think when you talk to nonpartisans, the same way I think often talking to members of either party, the economy in Nevada, right, as it is in many other states, is huge. Particularly in Nevada, the economic recovery since COVID has been in many ways remarkable, but slower than some other states because the Nevada economy is so tied to the national economy. If you're having struggles economically, what's the first thing you're going to cut? It's that trip to Vegas, right, in your budget. And it's a state that really relies on tourism. And so, unemployment there is it's still about 5%, still higher than the rest of the country, even though, it was 30% at the peak of COVID when the strip was shut down and everything. There has been job growth. Wage growth has been a bit stagnant. They've added jobs in new sectors like manufacturing especially. But when you talk to voters, they're really frustrated about the cost of food, the cost of gas. And one thing that comes up a ton that I think is sort of open for either party to take on as an issue is the cost of housing. Ever since the recession, which also really destroyed the Nevada economy, home building there has been really slow to bounce back. You have tons of in-migration to Nevada from California in particular. And so there's way more people looking for housing. There's less housing being built. And so the cost of housing, the cost of rent has really risen. People are getting priced out. And it's an issue I hear come up all the time, particularly with those registered nonpartisans.
Obviously, there's national eyes on Nevada right now. I was talking to a Democratic strategist from the state earlier this week, and she said something that both campaigns are missing is that Nevada's not a state that's just Reno or just Las Vegas. And she thinks that both campaigns really feel that way. And when they come in, they go to either one of those cities and then they get out of there. And the other voters in the smaller towns, the smaller cities, often feel forgotten. Is that something you've come across in your reporting?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Nevada has 17 counties. Reno is in one, and Washoe County. Las Vegas is in Clark County. And yeah, candidates do tend to focus their efforts there because 70% of the vote is in Clark County. and a lot of the rest of it is in Washoe, so there's just not that many people in the rurals. However, they do really matter, and I think one example of that was in the 2022 midterm. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat, did just a little bit better than her Democratic governor counterpart, Steve Sisolak, with rural voters. She goes on a rural tour every year. She has those relationships. And that difference might be why she won by about 1%, whereas Governor Sisolak lost by 3 or 4 points. And there was that ticket splitting. So it is a big deal. Democrats have put investment into sort of managing their margins in the rurals, knowing they're not going to win any of those rural counties, but trying to lose by less. What's ironic is that right now with early voting, we actually see Democrats turning out in the rurals at higher rates than Republicans. But because rural turnout as a whole is higher than the rest of the state, and because there's so many more Republicans, we're seeing Republicans really build out that firewall in rural areas where they're used to dominating and where issues like gun rights, or mining are really important.
When you're seeing this unprecedented news that's good for the GOP in early voting in Nevada, do you see any campaigns now, less than 2 weeks away from Election Day, knowing that this is one of those states that isn't necessarily a must-win, but it's definitely one of those top states that, combined with others, is on the pathway to victory? There's 6 electoral votes up for grabs. Is any campaign changing their strategy at all?
I think what's interesting is that there's one race, in which it really is a must-win, and that's for Democrats in the Senate. If Democrats lose any of their Senate, they're already expected to lose West Virginia. If they lose any other Senate seat, they're down to 49, and they have a minority no matter who's in the White House. And so Jackie Rosen is the Senate incumbent there. Now that you're seeing all this early vote data look really positive for Republicans, Republican-aligned groups in the Senate race are now dropping a bunch of money in Nevada, whereas previously they'd sort of avoided it. So Senate Leadership Fund, that's the super PAC that's linked to Mitch McConnell, they hadn't spent $1 in Nevada all cycle because the polls didn't look too good for the Republican candidate, Sam Brown. Now that they're seeing that there's all this enthusiasm for Trump, ostensibly, they're hoping that can trickle down to Brown, and they're making a last-minute $6 million ad buy in Nevada, their first buy in the state with less than 2 weeks to go until the election. So I think the group that has really woken up has been Senate Republicans.
When you've talked to voters who've participated in early voting, have they said anything that surprised you? Anything that comes to mind that sticks out, striking between now and Election Day?
I think, as I was on the ground in Las Vegas last week, my colleagues are on the ground. I think just enthusiasm. I mean, they saw really long lines that first day of early voting. You see both campaigns really focusing on it. The Democrats brought out Barack Obama to headline a rally. Republicans had candidates all up and down the state. Bill Clinton came by this week to talk about early voting. I do want to mention Democrats do traditionally do better in the second week of early voting rather than the first, so we'll see what happens there. And more Republicans than Democrats voted early in 2020 and 2022. Democrats have really preferred the mail. But I think you're really seeing enthusiasm. One thing that really struck me was the Nevada GOP chair, Michael McDonald. He's been a huge proponent of election denial conspiracy theories. He was one of the fake electors for Trump in 2020. One of the main voices saying that he doesn't trust the mail, doesn't trust early voting. He voted early for the first time in his life in this election cycle. So I think you're seeing a lot more Republican investment and trust in early vote to the point that even those who were falsely banging the drum about election denialism are now early voting.
That's really interesting. Are they saying anything publicly or even privately about their change of heart from 4 years?
I think they've realized that it's not a good idea to sort of depress a voter method that's really effective, and so it's sort of interesting. They contributed to all this election denialism, lack of trust in elections, and now they're saying, now that we're engaged, you can trust early vote. Obviously, it was trustworthy the entire time, right, as was the mail. But I think there's been a real acknowledgement from the top down, and Trump will sometimes say this. He has sort of mixed messaging, but there's been an acknowledgement that to win the game, you have to play the game. And sort of getting Republicans in Nevada all on the same page about you can trust early voting, get out there and early vote. Not 100%, there's still county officials who will cast doubt on it. And I'm sure if Harris wins, there will be a flurry more in state. But for now, we're seeing a real embrace of early voting in particular.
And you're seeing the results of that with more Republicans turning out than Democrats in that first week. But earlier this month, you had a really interesting piece, and you reported on the younger voters in Nevada, those younger than 35. They make up a quarter of the electorate, and you wrote this. In a 50-50 presidential election, the vote from those younger than 35 could be more meaningful than ever, but campaigns have to get them to turn out. What does that look like? How are each campaigns turning them out?
Yeah, I think this is a real difference from 2020 when so much of the organizing was digital. Now, the Democrats have told me they're all in on events. So they're having happy hours where they bring surrogates. They're having sort of parties at locations near early voting locations to try to really encourage people to make it fun to turn out and come out. The Republicans have also been invested. Former President Trump has appeared on all these podcasts, had influencers out at rallies. They're really trying to target young men in particular, I think, is the demo that they're looking at. They've been tabling at college campuses at UNLV. Turning Point, that's Charlie Kirk's organization, has a big presence at University of Nevada up in Reno. So there's a real effort by both campaigns to engage younger voters. Traditionally, right, they do break for Democrats. And I think Democrats really want to ensure that they have good turnout to make sure that people who are left-leaning do turn out for the race and don't just stay at home. Whereas Republicans, I think, are trying to find persuadable young men in particular who they would call low propensity voters, people who don't vote every cycle, but when they do, are inclined towards Republicans, and try to make sure that those younger voters are voting for Trump.
A happy hour is always fun. A free event is always fun. But when it comes down to those issues, what issues matter most to those younger voters? What is going to really propel them not only to go to the happy hour, grab a drink, but then go on November 5th or participate in early voting?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk to younger voters, obviously they're very passionate about issues like the war in Gaza, right? That's been a huge focus on the left when you see these college campus protests and frustration with the Democratic Party over that. But I think one thing that goes under discussed is that young voters' issues are often the same as everyone else, and maybe even more so on the economy. It's young voters who are worried about if they're ever going to be able to afford a house, what kind of job they're going to get after college, what their wages are in those first, second jobs that they have. And so those are huge issues. Abortion is really big among younger women in particular. That is younger women are the group of people that are most affected, right, by abortion policy. It's protected in Nevada, but it's obviously a huge national issue. And so I think it's often the same as the broader electorate, with I think a bit more of a concern on issues like foreign policy. And then I think one thing that hasn't been discussed a ton is you will hear about climate change come up with younger voters, and concern about increased. Las Vegas has a lot of is one of the most polluted cities. There's a lot of rising temperatures and experiences like that, heat waves, wildfires up in the north. And so that's something that you hear young voters bring up too.
When you look at the Silver State as a whole, which campaign has the better ground game? Are you seeing more Harris signs than Trump? Are you seeing one campaign really dominate opposed to the other? Or does it depend? Rural areas more Republican. You're seeing more Harris campaigners in the cities.
I mean, this is true, I think, of most election cycles in Nevada. The Democrats are better organized. They always are. Harry Reid built an incredible ground game there that's outlasted him. All of the unions will come out in Las Vegas and knock over 1 million doors. I went canvassing last week with some of the Teamsters just to see what it was like. They're, door knocking, doing phone calls, having events. They're, really energized, and they have to be, because typically in Nevada, Republicans do turn out at a higher rate. And so it's incumbent upon the Democratic Party and all of their allies to try to get people to turn out, to try to get, all of those in Las Vegas, working class voters who work off schedule can be hard to pin down and hard to track down, make sure that they vote and get to the polls. Donald Trump has outsourced a lot of the ground game in Nevada to various PACs, including one run by Elon Musk that we saw reports in The Guardian that there's been people who are, signing up to take those shifts canvassing and don't do it, and they're being flagged for sort of suspicious activity. They did hire, Elon Musk's PAC did hire Chris Carr, who's a veteran political operative in Nevada. He worked for Governor Lombardo. Way back in the day, he worked for President Bush and helped him win in 2004. So, there are some competent people there, but in general, a lot of it has been outsourced, and we don't, when you look on the ground, there's way more Democratic canvassers, phone bankers, all of that out there engaging in the ground game.
And as a correspondent in Nevada, what are you specifically looking out for between now and November 5th?
I think we're going to continue to look at those early vote numbers. We're going to see between mail and the second week if Democrats can try to break into Republicans' lead. If Republicans have a lead going into Election Day, I think it's going to be pretty hard for Harris to turn that around unless she wins by significant margins with nonpartisan voters, right? That's the big question right now. And so, what we still need to find out, right, is who are nonpartisans voting for? Is it a traditional election where each candidate is going to win about 90% of their party, or are we going to see registered Democrats voting for Trump or registered Republicans, which the Harris campaign has made a huge effort to invest in, voting for Harris? And then the other thing is, with early voting going so well for Republicans, are they cannibalizing at all any of their traditional election day vote, or are these low propensity voters or new voters? And we can get some of that data, I think, in the coming days and have a clearer picture of that. But the main question for me, which we won't know until Election Day, is who are nonpartisans voting for?
Well, certainly a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I hope you come back on when the answers become more clear. Gabby, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.